And we're live.
All right. Hey, everyone. How's it going? My name is Phil Daian. I am a PhD student at Cornell and co-founder of Flashbots. I'm here to talk about why reorgs, I put might be, the answers probably are negative sum, and not just for ETH, but for proof of work in general. A quick disclaimer, this talk is not research. So I give a lot of talks on research results in sort of my capacity at Cornell. And those feature kind of highly polished, highly validated, data-driven or theoretical insights. This is not going to be that. This is going to be more of an op-ed, which is why it's in the op-ed section, and kind of talk about how I think about reorgs and how Flashbots thinks about reorgs. Disclaimer number 2 is that Dan's talk from earlier really already iterated pretty much all of my points. So really, if you've already seen Dan's talk, maybe you want to use this opportunity to go get a tea, get a coffee, get some fresh air, whatever you might need to do, because I'm sure he said it better than I'm going to. I'm also going to try to get us some time back. So hopefully this doesn't take the whole 15 minutes. So first thing I want to talk about is broadly where we are today. So as we're having this event together, we are kind of against this backdrop of a lot of geopolitical action that's starting to move on cryptocurrency, both on Bitcoin, on Ethereum, on DeFi specifically. All of these issues are kind of coming to a head on multiple fronts. And within the community, we've seen this kind of coming, and we've been anticipating this for many years now. But now we're seeing actually, for example, last week in Congress, a session where they mentioned words like miner extractable value and backrunning and sandwiching, previously kind of all in our little niche communities. These are things that are going to soon have mainstream explanations or understandings of them. Not only that, but there's also a regulatory push on several fronts, one of them being to recoup funding on sort of the back of cryptocurrency and its use in tax evasion, which may be overstated oftentimes. The other thing is a push to ensure that these protocols and these financial systems we're building are fair for end users and for consumers that they're being marketed towards. And this isn't something that's going to go away. This is sort of what regulators do all day. So this is a glass-blowing joke. Anyone get it? Yeah, maybe 5% of people. So basically the regulators are coming. And that's important to keep in mind as we think about experimenting and think about doing so responsibly and in a way that is sane with the amount of capital our space has now attracted, and also keeps in mind our responsibility as sort of early stewards of this new technology. All right, so real quick, this has been kind of gone over several times before. I'm going to oversimplify a bunch of math. There's like a trillion asterisks on this. This is like eventual equilibrium math if like everyone is playing rationally and no one has an edge on the network, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what does the reorg kind of argument really look like at its core, at its simplest form? The reorg argument is basically, let's say a blockchain like Ethereum is ticking along, where you have a highly non-uniform distribution of value to be extracted, and possibly with a long tail of high amounts of value to be extracted in certain blocks. And let's say you have a really profitable block come along on the network that miners know how to extract a bunch of MEV out. Here's one in green. So when you have a miner mining normally, and everyone's playing this game honestly, basically one miner is going to win this opportunity, and they'll have basically close to 100% chance of keeping this profit. This is basically just the honest uncle rate, and they'll have an advantage in this if they're kind of preferred as the first block coming in on the network. So they'll have a very high probability of inclusion. Now, what the reorg argument says is that for other miners playing this game, rather than mining on top honestly and continuing the chain moving forward, it's maybe more profitable to take a 50% shot at sort of orphaning the previous guy and claiming the value. And assuming you play this game perfectly as the second miner and you use every possible advantage, you probably have in most equilibriums at most the chance of the original guy of kind of taking this opportunity. So what have you done? You've given yourself kind of a good amount of profit, your own individual self. You haven't really introduced any more money into the system in any substantial way, right? And you've also reduced the previous miner's chance of profiting, the previous person who was playing this game, down to 50%. But if this green block is profitable enough, as an individual actor, it's in your interest to do this. And this looks a whole lot kind of like a tragedy of the commons here, with the blockchain as the commons. Taking this one step further, the next guy coming in, assuming he plays perfectly or she plays perfectly compared to the previous two, they'll basically be splitting the chance of making this profit 3 ways. So again, increasing your individual probability if you're not sort of in this set, but decreasing your overall profitability. Again, this is oversimplifying things. There are also obviously complex kind of state machine Markov simulations you have to do to get exactly the probabilities of like these people continuing to mine blocks that take into account real time, that take into account cost and network hash rate. It gets very complicated. But this is the intuition, basically, that each person coming along, they don't create any new pie. They're just trying to maximize their own distribution of the pie at the expense of everyone else who's playing the game. So taking this to its end conclusion, basically this game will continue until the marginal cost of playing isn't worth the reward anymore. And then an arbitrary winner kind of proceeds with this profit. And there's a lot of confounders here. You could also have, this is something that's been discussed in several talks at this session already, kind of pay forward bribes on either of these chains. So this is something that's talked about in the original kind of paper that does the math on a lot of these attacks, on the instability of Bitcoin without the block reward paper. And they talk about sort of leaving some of this money on the table as a bribe for people on your chain, et cetera, et cetera. So the game gets really messy, but in the best case, in the best case of the game, you have basically the same amount of MEV that's going to be democratized somehow, right? Because rather than having one single miner get lucky, you have everyone kind of playing this game, and it's somewhat of a lottery to all rational miners. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is actually reducing the amount of MEV for all participants in the system, because this game that's being played isn't without externalities. Again, these are all points that many, many other people have made today. And also, honest miners actually, as we've pointed out repeatedly, have a large action space they can take to reduce the profitability of attacks or shore up the system. So something to keep in mind here, if you see any profitability argument as someone who's thinking about engaging in such an attack, is that all math is somewhat oversimplified and assumes some model of reality. So this is one example from the original selfish mining paper, where you have a relatively complex, but pretty mathematically simple, actually, argument for why selfish mining actually is more profitable than mining individually if you have rational actors kind of in the Bitcoin network. And this is because you can kind of increase your share of the percentage of blocks that are mined, even though you're decreasing the number of blocks you actually mine in a given time period. The idea being that over time, the difficulty algorithm will kind of compensate for this and will compensate you more than your fair share. But another paper, this is the Square RL paper, that took a look at multi-agent games in this model, which is something, again, Dan talked a lot about, found that the profit in many cases kind of cancels each other out, depending on the model you use and depending on the model of rationality you use. And in fact, is probably a more realistic model, not a less realistic model than previous work. So this is something to keep in mind, that like there's always another layer to the game. The game here, really all we know about it is that it's really an infinitely complex game, especially on Ethereum, where the degrees of freedom with protocol and transaction manipulation are so high. So because of this, just the cognitive overhead of kind of optimizing this game, and also the likely lack of long-term profitability, because it doesn't fundamentally create any new value. It just redistributes existing value that miners are already, to an extent, capturing in many ways. So these two properties are really why we haven't seen probably as much action as much of the game theory suggests. And to kind of cement this point more, we can consider another strategy in this strategy space, which is kind of the grim trigger approach, which is that if all honest network participants can kind of have rough consensus on which block they want to use their mining power on, they're greatly increasing the probability that that block will succeed at the expense of the other blocks. And so if the honest guys have some estimation of which of these forks is honest, this changes the game theory a lot, because it allows them to basically threaten all of these guys credibly that they will not mine on top of their blocks, and therefore increase the hash power, the effective hash power of this first attacker. Again, we're making a lot of assumptions here. We're kind of tabling SPV mining. There are many, many deeper analyses of this that take into account all of these parameters. I highly recommend looking at the talks earlier to go deeper into this. But the point here is that there's actually a lot you can do as an honest participant to shore up the blockchain. And there's a lot of ways for honest participants to converge. So this was a great talk we saw earlier, and this is kind of a paper from IOHK, everyone's favorite research organization in the space, comparing various strategies to deal with 51% attacks and to get an estimator or a subjective consensus on which block is honest, which you can use in such a Grim trigger strategy. So the one we saw kind of presented in more depth earlier was MESS, which is a subjective scoring rule that looks at reorgs and kind of discounts them based on when they were seen by various nodes. So this is all well and great. There's a lot of strategies you can do. There's a lot of counterattacks to those strategies. But why do we say that this game is negative sum? Why isn't it just redistribution? Why is it actually reducing the pie? So a few reasons I think that are serious externalities of these kinds of approaches. One of them is system stability. Users lose faith in the system, and that goes with price. So MEV is often quantified in units of cryptocurrency. And if you're doing something that harms the price of cryptocurrency, you're obviously doing something that's counterproductive to your own attack and your own actions. So that's the first kind of effect. The second one is regulation. And this is pretty big. So this is what we were talking about earlier. In this kind of time of intense political scrutiny, and in a time when we're going to be seeing a lot of public narratives which don't concern themselves with nuance and don't concern themselves with the same assumptions and the same trade-offs that we prefer as a cryptocurrency community, and instead have whatever other agendas or goals they may have. There are already pushes to use these kind of actions taken by miners to regulate them further that are very concrete and that are going on right now. So highly recommend kind of being informed on these issues because it affects the game theory of how miners play, whether we want to consider it in our sandbox or not. The next one is the very security meme of mining. So the reason that mining is a profitable business and that you can have this kind of let's sit down and figure out how much GPUs or ASICs cost and like game out our operational expenditures and decide whether to try to profit from these ecosystems is because these ecosystems are paying miners a lot of money every single day with the belief that this provides their chain security. If we live in a continuous reorg environment, even on large chains like Bitcoin, that kind of strikes at the core of this meme and argues for either reduced mining issuance and products on top that deal with uncertainty, or possibly moves to other systems or other shoring up in general, which will kind of reduce the net revenue miners make in the long term on every chain in the ecosystem, because memes don't kind of stay contained to one chain. Another thing is, so there are many countermeasures here, and these all have UX trade-offs. And the UX trade-offs are painful for users. The last point I want to mention is Uncle Bandits. So this is the idea that basically Flashbot searchers are harmed by reorgs because they're doing highly risky and highly sensitive transactions. There are many patterns of MEV which require you to actually put capital at risk in order to extract profit. And right now, the miners are directly earning the majority of this profit through systems like Flashbots, designing the auction kind of specifically for this purpose. But if we begin striking at the heart of these searchers' risk profiles, that activity becomes disincentivized and this MEV pie becomes smaller for everyone. So not only are you reducing it through all these other externalities, but you're also reducing it directly through how efficiently you can extract the honest MEV for the 1 block and the 0 block MEV that's proving highly profitable today. And we've talked about a lot of mitigations, the Grim trigger strategy, fork choice rules, just accelerating the proof of stake merge, and also adding gadgets on top for economic stability like MESS. So in general, my view on reorgs is that your expected profit is going to go down a little bit from not having reorgs, and you're going to have a much, much more unpredictable environment as a miner, which also decreases your ability to operate efficiently. So really not overall a net to have kind of continuous reorgs and a net good to have continuous reorgs in a system. So again, let's be thoughtful about this. Let's set a good example, and let's build secure economic systems for everyone. So last is a call to help us, help you, help us all. and visit flashbots.net if you're interested on more of these conversations. We also are happy to fund pretty much any research on anything that's been discussed here for people who are qualified to do it. Please reach out. All right. Thank you very much. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Phil. We're going to transition to our next session now.